Hello, my name is Maylene. After my dad's funeral, my mother turned to me and said, "You shouldn't exist." Then she left, with my sister, and never looked back. For 9 years, they rewrote history without me in it. They took my name off the will, off the family photo, off every memory that mattered. But what hurt most wasn't what they took. It was how easy it was for everyone else to believe I was never there to begin with. So, what happens when the one they erased refuses to stay silent? Do you really want to know? I remember the weight of the coat, not because it was heavy, because I was. It swallowed me the way grief does. My fingers clung to the worn wool sleeves, like they were the last thing tethering me to something familiar. The cemetery was quiet, but not peaceful. You could hear the wind shuffle leaves, and the occasional cough from a guest trying to pretend they weren't crying. The sky pressed low, gray and unwilling. I stood next to my father's casket, not fully understanding how something that had always been there, his voice, his laugh, his worn-out flannel shirts, could suddenly be not. Coraline, my stepmother, stood to my right like a statue, not grieving, just present. And Delara, my older sister, her lips drawn tight like she was holding in a secret no one else knew. When the minister closed his Bible, Coraline leaned close. I expected her to whisper something, anything, comforting, but instead, in a voice soft and icy, she said, "You shouldn't exist." I didn't understand it at first. Not really. I turned to her, blinking up through the mist in my eyes. Her expression didn't change. She didn't even look at me again. She just turned, took Delara by the hand, and walked away. Not a single person stopped her. Not one asked where she was going. I stood there, 9 years old, fingers frozen around the edge of my coat sleeve, watching the only two people left in my family disappear behind a veil of drifting autumn fog. By the time I realized they weren't coming back, not that day, not ever, the last shovel of dirt had been thrown. My father's grave was sealed, and so was my place in that family. That night, I stayed at the house because I didn't know what else to do. The grown-ups, the ones who knew how wills and custody worked, hadn't figured it out yet. Or maybe they had, and didn't care. I curled up on the old brown couch in the living room. The lamp next to me hummed. I left it on because darkness felt too final. I waited. For a call. A knock. Footsteps. Nothing came. Around 9, I got up and walked to the window. Delara's car wasn't in the driveway. Coraline's SUV was gone too. The mailbox was stuffed with sympathy cards no one would open. It started to drizzle. I didn't cry. I walked to the kitchen and stared at the cordless phone on the counter. I remembered my dad saying, "In case of emergency, dial 911 or hit the red button." But what number do you call when your emergency is emotional abandonment? There was no button for that. I opened the fridge out of habit. It smelled like leftovers and loss. The lasagna Mrs. Keener had dropped off 2 days ago was untouched. I didn't eat it. By 11, I sat on the porch swing, arms wrapped around my knees. The wind had picked up. I pulled my coat tighter, chin buried in the collar. That's when the porch light across the street clicked on, and a door creaked open. "Maylene," came a voice I knew. Miss Odella. Lived alone, made perfect cornbread, always wore her hair in tight gray curls. I nodded. Couldn't even answer out loud. She walked over slowly, wrapped a shawl around my shoulders, like I was her own blood. "You can come stay the night with me, honey, just until someone figures things out." That's how I ended up in her guest room. I didn't even take off my coat. She gave me hot tea in a chipped white mug and left the light on when she closed the door. I lay there staring at the ceiling, the shadows making shapes that reminded me of stories Dad used to tell. A trucker who'd seen a ghost on the I-26. A dog that knew when people were going to die. None of those stories scared me. Not like this silence did. I looked at the photo on the nightstand. A picture of me, younger, on my dad's shoulders. We were laughing. I didn't even remember that day, but I knew he'd been there. I whispered into the dark, "Dad, if you're listening, why does she hate me? What did I do?" There was no answer, just the slow ticking of the clock on the wall. I didn't sleep that night. My body was still, but my mind kept walking back through the funeral, back through her voice, back through the way Delara never once turned around. I was 9. I didn't know anything about power or betrayal or how easy it was for people to vanish you with words. But I knew what it felt like to be erased. Something inside me cracked that day. Not all at once, just enough to let the cold in. That night, after I lay still for hours pretending the blanket could shield me from what was already done, I told myself maybe Delara would call. Maybe Coraline would come back in the morning with some kind of excuse, something that sounded cold but made just enough sense to make the pain sit down quietly in my chest instead of tearing through it. But the sun came up, and the only thing that changed was the shadow across the guest room floor. Odella made oatmeal the next morning. She stirred it slowly, watching the pot, not me. "You don't have to go to school today, Malin," she said. "They'll understand." I nodded. I didn't want to explain anything. I didn't want to be the girl whose mom walked away from her at a funeral. That afternoon, while Odella was outside watering her porch plants, I sat in the hall closet, the only spot that felt like mine, and stared at her landline. It was an old cordless phone with a cracked screen and the battery cover taped on. I knew Delara's phone number by heart. My dad made sure I did, back when he still cared about small things like emergency contacts. I stared at the buttons for a while, then I pressed them, one by one. She picked up on the third ring. "Hello?" I froze. My breath hitched. "It's me," I whispered. "I just wanted to hear your voice." There was a pause. It wasn't long, but it said everything. Then, just the sound of her hanging up. Clean. No goodbye. No confusion. Just click. The phone went still in my hand. I didn't even cry. I just sat there, blinking, the silence crawling up my back like a cold wind. I knew then, it wasn't a mistake. They hadn't forgotten me. They had decided. That night, I didn't eat dinner. Odella didn't press. She left a sandwich on the nightstand and a glass of milk, like I was 5 years old again. I took a bite out of the sandwich and chewed slowly, trying to remember the last time someone said my name like it mattered. The next morning, I asked Odella where the nearest post office was. She raised an eyebrow but didn't ask why. She drove me there after breakfast. At the counter, I asked for an envelope, a stamp, and the quietest pen they had. I sat on the edge of the metal bench outside and wrote slowly, carefully. "Dear Mom and Delara, was it something I said? Was it my fault Dad died? Do I remind you of something bad? I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just miss you. Please write back. Please. Malin." I folded the letter in 3. I didn't seal it with anything special. No stickers, no smiley faces. Just a kid trying not to sound desperate. Odella walked with me to the mailbox. I slid the letter in, heard the soft clink as it fell, and waited. 4 days later, it came back. Same envelope. Torn at the corner. Inside wasn't my letter, not anymore. It had been crumpled. The only thing left was a small cocktail napkin. On it, in red lipstick, someone had scribbled, "Who are you?" I didn't ask Odella if she knew what it meant. I could tell by her face she'd seen it when she brought it inside. She had folded it back up carefully, like it was something fragile. That night, she handed me a cup of cocoa and sat across from me in the living room. The TV was off. The only light came from the lamp beside her chair. "I know it hurts, honey," she said gently, "but sometimes people erase others because facing their own guilt is too heavy." I stared into the cocoa. The marshmallows were melting into little cloudy shapes. "So if I don't exist," I asked, "will it stop hurting them?" She didn't flinch. "Maybe, but it won't stop hurting you." I didn't answer. I didn't finish the cocoa either. I carried it back to the guest room, set it on the dresser, and stood by the window for a long time. Later that night, I dug under the bed and pulled out the wooden box that had held old toys and hand-me-down sweaters. I cleared space between the blankets, lifted the loose board, and slid the envelope under it. I whispered, "Stay quiet for me." Then I pressed the board back into place. I didn't touch that letter again. Not for years. The days didn't feel like days anymore. Time passed like water through cloth, slow, soaking everything, but never holding its shape. I got used to Odella's morning routine, the sound of the kettle heating up, the creak of the hallway floorboards, the soft hum of her gospel station playing low in the background. She never pressed me for answers. She just let me exist, and that somehow made the silence less cruel. It was mid-January when the first real snow fell in Asheville. The backyard had turned into a sheet of white, and Odella asked if I could help her go through the hallway closet. She wanted to sort out old holiday decorations, things she said she no longer had the energy to put up. We sat on the floor, surrounded by dusty boxes and tangled lights. She handed me a small metal container that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I opened it slowly, expecting old photos, or maybe receipts. Instead, I found paperwork, files with my dad's handwriting on the corners. Tucked between a folded bank letter and some personal notes was a page that made my stomach pull tight. It was a hand-drawn family tree. Simple, just names and lines connecting them. My name was under my father's, connected by a single line. But where Coraline's name should have been, there was nothing. I stared at it too long. Odella noticed. "Those were your daddy's things," she said gently, sitting beside me. "Some truths grow heavy if they stay buried too long." The rest of the day, I didn't ask questions out loud, but they poured through me, quiet and fast. I kept replaying all the things Coraline never said, never did, all the ways she treated me like a misstep instead of a person. That night, while Odella made chicken soup and watched the local news from her armchair, I slipped into the hallway and pulled the metal box out again. I went through each folder slowly, hoping for answers I wasn't sure I wanted. One of the documents was a discharge summary from a hospital. The name Lucinda Myers was printed in bold at the top. Deceased. Listed under maternal record, Lucinda. That name meant nothing to me, but the way Odella's voice went quiet when I asked meant everything. She sat across from me at the table, her eyes damp but steady. "She was your mother," she said. "Your real one. She passed away right after you were born." I waited for more, some explanation, a reason why no one told me sooner. Instead, I asked what I shouldn't have asked, but couldn't help. "So I'm just a reminder of her? That's why Coraline left me?" Odella didn't nod. She didn't shake her head either, and in that moment, her silence was an answer I'd never forget. I didn't cry. I felt like I should have. But there was nothing. No memories of Lucinda, no sound of her voice, no image in my head to anchor grief to. It was like mourning a ghost you'd never seen. That night, I didn't eat much. I pushed food around my plate and excused myself early. Back in the guest room, I stood by the window, watching the snow slowly melt under the streetlight glow. It wasn't pretty. It just looked like something giving up. I pulled the wooden box out from under the bed again. The envelope was still there, yellowing at the edges. I unfolded the letter I'd written weeks before. The ink had smudged slightly. The words were as fragile as I felt. At the bottom, I added a single line. "If love is something you're born into, I wasn't born right." Then I folded it up neatly and returned it to its place beneath the floorboard, pressing the wood back down like it was a secret only I was allowed to keep. I didn't ask questions anymore. Not out loud. I watched people instead. The way they moved, the way they spoke when they thought no one was listening. I learned how to blend into the background, how to go unnoticed until I wanted otherwise. I knew Coraline hated what she couldn't erase cleanly, so I made myself untraceable, but not invisible. That night, I stopped waiting for someone to come back. I started learning how to disappear without leaving the room. 3 years slipped by quietly. I didn't mark them with birthdays or summers. They just passed, stacked behind me like pages I didn't have the heart to reread. By 13, I'd grown into someone people mistook for older. I liked that. It meant fewer questions. I had a part-time job folding scarves and restocking accessories at a small retail store in the Asheville Mall. Nothing fancy, just a boutique chain with too many mirrors and music that never stopped playing covers of songs that used to mean something. I was working a slow Wednesday afternoon, the kind where the customers wandered more than they shopped. My manager had just asked me to refold the end cap display, again. So I bent over the table, smoothing silk scarves into neat triangles. That's when I heard the laugh. Light. Familiar in a way that made my back stiffen. I looked up and saw her. Delara. She was standing near the entrance, holding the arm of a guy around her age. He was taller than her, built like someone who played sports just enough to stay impressive. Her hair was pulled into a sleek ponytail. She looked polished, comfortable, and not like someone who had once walked away from her sister at a funeral without a glance back. Our eyes met. I don't know what possessed me, but I smiled. It wasn't big, it wasn't hopeful. Just enough to say, I see you. Do you see me? Delara blinked, tilted her head, then turned to the boy beside her and said with a faint smirk, Let's go. The staff here are too eager. My hands didn't move, but inside, something dropped. She brushed past me as if I were just some girl making minimum wage on a slow shift. Not the sister she left behind. Not the kid who still had the same eyes as her, the same curve in the chin. I didn't say a word. I didn't even flinch. I just straightened the scarf on the table, pulled the next one into place, and pretended I hadn't just been made invisible again. I finished my shift, walked home in the dimming light, and didn't speak a word to Odella. She didn't ask. She never needed to. By the weekend, the whispers started. A girl in my homeroom leaned toward another and said, That's her, right? The one whose family ditched her. Another kid commented under a photo online. Sad girl still chasing her sister. Creepy. Someone even pulled up Delara's Instagram and pointed to a post of her at the mall. She said the girl who works there keeps showing up. Delara says she's just some distant cousin who won't let go. That one stung more than I thought it would. I stopped taking the bus. Started walking home, longer route, colder air, quieter. When I got back one afternoon, I pulled out my flip phone and opened the contact list. My thumb hovered over her name. Delara. I didn't delete it because I hated her. I deleted it because it didn't belong in my phone anymore. It didn't belong in my life. Odella noticed I came home earlier than usual. She didn't make a scene, just ladled soup into a bowl, set it in front of me, and said, People who lie long enough forget they're lying, but the truth never forgets. I didn't look up. I stirred the spoon through the broth and said, I don't need her to say sorry. I just want her to remember I existed. And I meant it. Because that's the thing no one tells you. Being erased hurts more than being hated. Hate means you mattered. Erasure means you never did. After dinner, I sat by the window while Odella read her book on the sofa. The lights were low. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. I didn't need an apology anymore. What I needed was something else. Something stronger than being remembered. That was the day I stopped trying to be seen and started learning how to be unforgettable without their permission. The Civic Center smelled like polished wood and perfumed ambition. Every corner buzzed with small talk, name tags, and practiced laughter. I'd been working there part-time for a few months now, setting up chairs, checking light cues, keeping donors happy without making noise. It paid a little and filled the hours Odella couldn't. That evening was a fundraiser for a local community outreach program. I arrived just before sunset. The main hall glowed with warm lighting, round tables dressed in linen, and a makeshift stage set up near the front with navy blue curtains pulled tight. Everything looked expensive but temporary, like it was built to impress people who already felt important. I was backstage adjusting the AV settings when I heard someone say, "She's next." Curious, I looked down at the program list taped to the clipboard. Guest speaker, Coraline Crenshaw. At first, I thought it must have been a mistake. Then I heard the clack of her heels crossing the platform, confident and slow, and I felt my whole body still. I moved quietly to the side curtain, just enough to see her step into the spotlight. She wore gray, sleek, tailored, sharp, like she'd rehearsed being admired. Her voice was smooth when she spoke, coated in just enough charm to sound maternal. "I've been blessed," she said, scanning the audience, "with one daughter, Delara. She has been the light of my life since the day she was born." I didn't blink. I didn't cry. I just lifted my phone, hit record, and held it steady. She kept talking about family, about raising strong young women, about community leadership. She said things like legacy and values with ease. But I heard every word she didn't say, louder than the ones she did. After the applause, she posed for photos with donors. Delara joined her on stage, wrapping an arm around Coraline's waist like it was the most natural thing in the world. They both smiled, wide, perfect, hollow. I stayed backstage, finished my shift, and clocked out early. On my way out, a volunteer I barely knew leaned toward me and said, "Hey, you and that woman out there. You related. You two kind of have the same jawline." I stared at her, then said calmly, "We share history, that's all." Then I walked outside into the cold night, tore the plastic badge from around my neck, and ripped it in two. I let the pieces fall into the nearest trash can. The next week, Coraline returned for a planning meeting. I was helping unpack boxes of event supplies when she walked in, her voice echoing through the space as if she owned it. I ducked into the storage area behind the lobby, thinking maybe I could avoid whatever was about to happen. But Delara came through the door a few moments later. She didn't expect to see me there. Our eyes locked. And for a split second, I thought she might say something, but she didn't. She looked right past me like I was another shadow on the wall. That time, I didn't stay quiet. "You don't get to erase me and then pretend I'm the problem," I said softly, keeping my voice flat. "Say I don't exist again, and I swear I'll make sure everyone sees the parts of the story you're trying to burn." Delara stopped walking. Coraline turned the corner then, noticed me standing there, and froze. For a moment, the polished facade cracked. She opened her mouth like she might say something, but she didn't. She turned away, adjusted her purse strap, and kept walking. I didn't follow. I didn't shout. I just went back to my clipboard, wrote down a fake inventory number, and moved on. That night, I saved the recording of Coraline's speech into a folder on my laptop called Rewrite Attempts. I added a backup to a flash drive and mailed it to myself, unopened, just to have a timestamp. I wasn't planning revenge. Not yet. But from that night forward, I wasn't waiting for acknowledgement anymore. I was preparing for exposure. It started with a question I couldn't shake. If someone rewrites your story without asking, do you wait for them to get it right? Or do you find the ink and take it back? The week after I saved the recording of Coraline's speech, I requested time off from the Civic Center and walked into the Asheville Public Records office on a Wednesday morning. The lobby was small, the lights harsh, and the clerk behind the plexiglass window had the look of someone who hated surprises. I asked for property and estate filings for Gideon Ruth. She raised an eyebrow. "You his wife?" "No, his daughter." There was a beat of hesitation. Then she handed me a form and told me to sit. I filled it out carefully, line by line. 20 minutes later, she called me up with a single manila folder. "Some of these are sealed," she said, voice flat, "but this one's open." Inside was a scanned amendment to my father's will, dated 3 weeks after he died. I flipped the page slowly. The original version listed 2 beneficiaries, Coraline Crenshaw and Malin Routh. The updated one had only Coraline. It was signed and notarized, but not by my father. Someone else's initials were on the witness line. I said thank you, walked out to the parking lot, and sat in the car until my fingers stopped shaking. Then I scanned the whole document on my phone, saved it, and slipped it into a folder on my laptop labeled Disappearance report. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the date, the signature, the silent erasure. If the system had a delete key, Coraline had learned to press it with precision. 2 days later, I got a knock at my apartment door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Odella always called first. When I opened it, I saw a man in his 60s wearing a charcoal trench coat and holding a weathered envelope. "Harlan Viscari," he said. "Your dad and I worked together at the university. We talked more than we taught, if I'm honest." I stepped aside. He walked in slowly, like he wasn't sure if he belonged here. "I kept something," he said, handing me the envelope. "Your father gave it to me the night before he passed. Told me not to give it to anyone unless I was absolutely certain it mattered." I opened it at the kitchen table. Inside was a copy of the real will, notarized, signed by Gideon's own hand. My name printed clearly. Half of everything, his estate, his land, his savings, was meant for me. There was also a letter, short, just 4 sentences, in the kind of handwriting that always leaned left like it was leaning out of time. "Maylin, if you're reading this, it means they tried to make you disappear. I couldn't stop them, but you were never invisible to me. Dad." I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just sat there, absorbing something I had craved for years. Acknowledgement. It didn't fix the hole, but it lit a match in the dark. Harlan stayed for a cup of coffee, told me he'd back me if anything legal ever happened, then left with the same quiet grace he arrived with. That evening, I scanned the will and saved it twice. Once to my laptop, once to the flash drive in my drawer. Then I emailed a PDF, unsigned, anonymous, from a burner account to the Asheville Legal Board, with the subject line: "Contested will, Gideon Ruth, possible tampering." I didn't wait for a reply. Then I picked up my phone and sent one text to Delara. "You erased my name once. If you want to keep yours, talk to your mother." No greeting, no emotion, just fact. A few hours later, I opened a blank document and typed the first sentence of something new. Inheritance and invisibility. It wasn't a diary. It wasn't even a threat. It was documentation, names, dates, lies, omissions, everything Coraline had tried to pave over. I was laying it all out, piece by piece, not for revenge, for record. I didn't hit publish, not yet. Because some storms work better when they gather slow. The teaser post sat quietly on the forum for the first day, barely noticed. A single line, 12 words, no names, no threats. Just a breadcrumb in a world hungry for secrets. When mothers erase daughters, the records don't lie. By the next morning, it had been shared 37 times. I didn't attach my name. I didn't need to. People recognize patterns faster than they admit, especially in small towns like Asheville. And if you leave a trail long enough, someone will follow it back to where the fire started. 2 days after the post went up, I was sitting in a cafe downtown, corner booth, back against the wall, just the way I liked it, when someone slid into the seat across from me. She didn't ask, didn't smile, just sat down and placed her iced coffee in front of her, like she was entitled to the space. "You're Maylene, right?" she asked. I nodded without giving her the courtesy of a full glance. "Camille," she said. "Delara's friend from undergrad. She asked me to talk to you." I took a sip of my coffee and waited. "She's saying you're bitter, that you're trying to ruin the family's name just because you feel left out. She said you're making things worse on purpose." I looked up, finally meeting her eyes. They flickered just for a second. "Tell her this," I said evenly. "I was family long before her reputation had a name." Camille blinked, looked uncomfortable, and grabbed her drink without saying anything else. She left as quickly as she came. I didn't watch her go. That night, I changed the title of my blog draft. I typed the new headline slowly. "Erased by Blood, the price of making people comfortable." The next hit came quietly. A few days later, I got an email at the nonprofit I'd recently started consulting for. Part-time, remote, discreet. The scholarship board I'd helped on last year had an emergency funding request. Anonymous but desperate. I read the details twice before I even considered the sender. Delara. She didn't know I had access. She didn't know I had helped shape the fund she now needed. The application was smooth. Polite. Our family has been facing some public accusations that have impacted my mother's work. We are seeking emergency assistance due to reputational damage and funding loss. I didn't reply. I forwarded the signed will, the real one, to the fund's internal review team, along with a note. Consider this before awarding based on character references. Then I flagged the application for internal denial. Quiet. Final. Delara never got a reply. She wouldn't. Not from me. Not from anyone. That same afternoon, I received a voicemail on Odella's house phone. "Malin," Coraline's voice began, cool and flat. "We've heard what you're doing. I hope you understand what lines you're crossing. I've buried worse, and I'm not above doing what needs to be done." Click. The next day, another message. "She's unstable. She's been obsessed with us for years, forging signatures, making things up. You should be careful who you trust." That was left with Odella's neighbor. Odella didn't confront me. She didn't need to. But she unplugged the landline that night and said, "Honey, some people throw dirt because they're scared you'll stand taller than what they buried." I smiled for the first time that week. That night, I didn't write anything new. I didn't update the post. I simply took the teaser and bumped it. Up the algorithm, up the visibility, and into a wider circle. Let them chase shadows. I had receipts. By the weekend, whispers had reached the edges of the legal board. Nothing public yet. But a colleague mentioned in passing over Zoom, "Hey, you're not involved in that family will drama, are you? Wild stuff." I just smiled and said, "Truth always shows up late, but it never needs an invitation." Coraline retaliated with whispers, threats, and legal noise. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't publish the full post. I waited. Let her run in circles, trying to clean a mess she couldn't even name. Because here's what she never understood. Lies move fast, but truth is patient. And silence, used right, isn't weakness. It's ammunition. They thought I'd break when they pushed back. But I'd already learned, silence is how you win without screaming. The Civic Center hadn't changed much since the last time I stood backstage with a clipboard and a lanyard. But this time, there was no clipboard, no badge, no job to do but stand still and own the space I once had to earn. The entry hall buzzed with soft conversation, the scent of catered food and new perfume blending into a kind of upscale fog. People nodded politely, shook hands, made promises they wouldn't remember by morning. It was the annual Community Impact Awards, and for once, I wasn't behind the curtain. I was on the program. I kept my posture relaxed as I moved through the check-in line. Gray suit, clean lines. No jewelry except a single bracelet Odella gave me on my 17th birthday. I didn't need flash. I wanted to blend in until it was time not to. When the usher led the nominees toward the reserved seats up front, I spotted them. 2 rows ahead, dead center. Coraline sat upright, hands folded neatly over a silver clutch, looking exactly like someone who had always been on the guest list. Delara beside her, thinner than I remembered, eyes scanning the room like she was bracing for something. They didn't see me. Or maybe they did, and just didn't flinch. I didn't react either. I'd had too much practice holding still. Instead, I sat quietly, listened through the opening remarks, the mediocre jokes from the MC, and the rounds of polite applause. I waited. Eventually, they called my name. "Tonight's Youth Legacy Award goes to Malin Shipka," said the announcer. "Daughter of the late Professor Gideon Ruth, a survivor, a leader, and a reminder that names can be taken from papers, but not from truth." There was a pause, short but loud. Then scattered clapping. Cameras flashed. Somewhere in the back, someone whispered, "Wait, that's her?" I stood, walked to the podium without rush, and took the award from the presenter with both hands. It was glass. Cold, heavy, fragile-looking, but solid. I turned to the audience. "My story," I began, "isn't about revenge. It's about omission. About how easy it is to erase someone when their presence makes others uncomfortable." I glanced up, briefly, at Coraline and Delara. Coraline's smile didn't move. Delara's eyes were down. "Not every family starts with love," I said, "but we all get to decide how we end our stories." I thanked the organizers, gave a nod to the scholarship mentors, and walked off stage to a ripple of applause. Some of it unsure, most of it genuine. Backstage, I stayed for the group photo, accepted the bouquet of flowers with a polite smile, and kept the small talk short. Someone asked where my parents were. I said, "Not here," and moved on. Later, I gave a brief interview to the local paper. When they asked who I wanted to thank, I said, Odella Trask, for opening a door when everyone else shut theirs, Harlan Viscari, for keeping his promise, and my father, for remembering me when it counted. I didn't mention Coraline. I didn't need to. By the time I returned to my seat, Coraline and Delara were gone. No goodbye, no explanation. Just two empty chairs surrounded by whispers. Back at home, I took off the suit jacket, folded it neatly, and laid it across the back of a chair. The plaque sat on my desk, next to the flash drive and the sealed envelope from Harlan. The blog post draft still lived in its folder. Still untouched. Still unpublished. I thought maybe I'd finish it that night. But I didn't need to anymore. They spent years writing me out. But tonight, someone else read me in. Morning came quietly. The air in the apartment still held a trace of last night's perfume. Part flowers, part stage lights, part adrenaline I hadn't shaken off yet. I stood barefoot at the window, a mug of black tea resting in my palms, watching the sun rise slow over the rooftops. It was the first sunrise in years that didn't feel like it was demanding anything from me. The award plaque sat on the desk near the sealed envelope Harlan had once handed me. Next to it, my laptop lay closed. The draft blog post, the flash drive, all still untouched. My phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. I didn't answer. I let it ring until it stopped. A minute later, a message lit up the screen. "We'd like to meet. Talk. Just us. Delara." I stared at it for a full minute. Maybe more. Then I deleted it. Not out of anger, but clarity. They had said what they needed to when it cost nothing. I'd said what I needed without raising my voice. There was no value in dragging it out. I didn't need closure from people who only remembered I existed when their reputation got bruised. Later that afternoon, I met Harlan for a walk at the edge of the botanical gardens. He wore the same brown coat he always did, creased at the elbows, pocket-torn just enough to make it familiar. We didn't talk much at first, just strolled through the half-frozen path that cut through the trees. He handed me a manila folder, simple and clean. "It's done," he said. "The title's officially yours now. The house is back in your name." I looked down at the papers inside. Signatures, dates, a simple note from the courthouse. All official. "Thank you," I said. "You going to move in?" he asked casually. "No," I replied, shaking my head. "That place has too many ghosts, too many rooms with voices I never belonged in." He nodded, like he'd expected that. "I think," I added, "it's better off being sold. Let someone else give it a new name." "You don't owe it anything," he said, voice low. That was the last we spoke that day. We walked the rest of the loop in silence. Then he tipped his hat goodbye and got into his car. I stayed behind for a while longer, just sitting on the bench near the entrance, watching a family take holiday photos near the fountain. When I returned home, I went straight to the closet. Tucked behind a stack of worn paperbacks and an old fleece blanket was the wooden box Odella had helped me carry out years ago. I set it on the floor, opened the lid, and pulled out the envelope I'd once hidden beneath her floorboards. The paper had yellowed. My child handwriting wobbled where I'd gripped the pen too tight. I unfolded it slowly and read it again. The letter I had once written to people who never wrote back. Was it my fault? Did I make you sad? Please write back, please. I didn't cry. I didn't feel angry. I felt still. I added a sticky note to the corner, kept for context. Then I slid it into a simple frame I'd picked up the week before, mounted it next to my desk, and stepped back. It didn't feel like pain anymore. It felt like evidence I had lived through something. That night, I brewed another cup of tea and opened my laptop. But I didn't go back to the blog draft. I opened a new document entirely. Title: Existing Out Loud, The Power of Being Unchosen. I began typing, not to out anyone, not to get the last word, but to offer something to someone else who might be sitting in a guest room wondering what they did wrong. I wrote about erasure, about silence, about how healing doesn't always mean returning to what broke you. The post wasn't meant to shame anyone. It wasn't a wound. It was an offering. A kind of letter, finally sent, to the version of myself who once begged someone to remember she existed. I signed it with my full name. Not Maylene the orphan. Not Maylene the footnote. Just Maylene. Some stories don't need apologies or reunions. Some just need a name that no one can take away again. Some things take years to understand. It took me nearly a decade to realize that being unloved by the wrong people doesn't make you unworthy. It just means their love was never meant to define you. If you're watching this and you've ever felt invisible inside your own family, I want you to know something. You are not the problem. Sometimes people reject what they don't have the courage to face in themselves. I didn't get justice in a courtroom. I got it in silence, in growth, in refusing to shrink anymore. And maybe that's the quietest, loudest revenge, choosing peace when the world expects bitterness. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been pushed aside, only to come back stronger? Do you believe healing means reconnection or letting go? Tell me in the comments. Type 1 if this story touched something in you, or let me know where you're watching from. I'd love to see how far our community reaches. And hey, if you didn't connect with this story, that's okay too. Share why. Share what you believe. That's what makes this space honest. If this video meant something to you, please consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss the next story. There's always more to uncover, more to heal, more to share. Thank you for listening. See you in the next one.